Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our first webinar for LCOY Botswana 2024. As you might be aware, today's webinar is titled Driving Narratives. And so we're hoping to today get an understanding of what LCOY is, why we're doing LCOY, and I think particular to today, why it's important for children and youth to drive narratives on climate governance. We will be starting just shortly. All right, I think we are good to go. I trust all our speakers are joined in on the webinar. I think without any further ado, let me take this opportunity to welcome you all and welcome Ms. Tracy Sunny, the National Coordinator at the Botswana Climate Change Network, to open our webinar and welcome all participants to the webinar. Tracy, over to you.
Okay, there's a bit of light there. Okay, thank you very much, Tsepi. And first, let me recognize the presence of our partners, UNICEF, our partners, Sustain, and also Global Shapers. And then also, I've seen in our agenda, we have notable presenters, Barra Thalerwa and others. I'll recognize your presence. The webinar for today, it's specifically looking at, it's our first, this will be our first initiative, our first efforts towards, it's a continuous thing actually, building the momentum towards youth and children engagement in climate change agenda. It is important to note that children and youth, they are important stakeholders in the move towards sustainable development. And specifically, now looking at the Paris Agreement, achieving emissions. And I'll say that because there are different avenues. We are looking at green economy. We are looking at building youth that will, in the future, build or drive efforts behind a sustainable futures, sustainable green economies. So we should note that since COP11 in Montreal, Canada, this was mostly the first, I would say, one of the first COPs where youth actively engaged or participated in climate change discourse, where they were recognized, their efforts were recognized, and they were given a space to voice out their concerns, to engage effectively. And this also at the same time seeing recognizing their importance in driving climate policy. And then also looking at the growing response or the growing number of youth who are engaging in the intergovernmental climate change processes. The UNFCCC actually in 2009 extended a constituency status to youth groups, allowing them to receive official information, participate in meetings, and even request for slots and also support for conferences. So you realize that this was where now we see youth effectively engaging more in the climate discourse. And then this building towards the Paris Agreement, there was evidence actually, even for those youth, I think, who are here, who participated in the Paris Agreement, there was evidence of youth stepping up efforts and being on the forefront, actually. We know we have notable youth, we have notable children who have been participating. Even when you go to COPs, they are participating and they are also being accredited. They have observer status. They do attend, different ages, youth and children of different ages. So we have seen, this is the sort of the build-up and the build-up of youth, of children engagement over the years. Now here we are. For Botswana, we are saying we shouldn't be left behind. We recognize the importance of youth. And this is not the first gathering that we have had, or the first initiative towards ensuring that youth voices are heard. We actually have been doing this over the past years, since especially after Paris Agreement. We have had youth beatles, we have on climate change, youth conferences, where we have been bringing youth together, trying to mainstream, trying to engage them in climate change discourse. And it is our aim to see youth, having, seeing youth having meaningful participation. And it doesn't mean only attending COPs, but rather, coming up with, like for today, we are looking at narratives, building up narratives that can influence our policy, and that can have something tangible that we can, really point out to say we have made a change, we have brought change, and we are going to see change in the future. So this webinar, I would like us to engage, to advise, and to pave a way for meaningful participation of the youth. And with us knowing that these are the future generation, this is the future generation, and these are the people that are going to drive these policies that we are currently working on, and also policies later in the future. And I would like to welcome everyone again, and I would like to just say to everyone, feel free, please engage. Make sure that, from here we achieve the objectives that we would want to achieve, particularly looking at, the build up towards COP, particularly the build up to the different activities that are going to happen over the next weeks up to COP, and also later on after COP, later on through different implementation avenues, initiatives that will come on. So let us feel free to engage. Let it not be only the speakers, the panelists, but also the participants. Please feel free to engage in the conversation. Just to say back to you, Tepi, I welcome everyone, and I wish you all good deliberations. Back to you, Tepi.
Thank you very much. That was Tracy Sunny, the National Coordinator at the Botswana Climate Change Network, for those opening remarks. I think now that the doors are open, and please just maybe a couple of housekeeping rules. When you join, please make sure that your mic is muted. If you do have want to throw in join in the conversation, please feel free to join the conversation in the chat room. Let's keep the chat room busy. If you have any specific question that you would want to be addressed during the course of the webinar, please make use of the Q&A section, and we'll have the relevant person respond to your question during the Q&A segment of the webinar. I think apart from that, let us also take the conversation out to social media using the hashtag LCOY Botswana 2024 or LCOY Botswana 24, and carry the conversation outside to other people that might not be able to join the webinar today. Just a reminder also, this is a recorded session, and so please, if you do have any objections to recording, do let us know directly. If not, we will continue with the recording. The recording will be made available on our YouTube channels at Sustain 267, Botswana Climate Change Network, as well as the Global Shapers media pages as well. If you do want access to last year's webinar recordings for our LCOY sessions, they will be shared in the chat room as well. I think Tech will share those in the chat room. And please, we want to know where you're joining us from across Botswana, what it is you're doing, just a short introduction in the chat so that we know who's engaging with us. Where are you joining us from? Please let us know in the chat room. I think with that, we will be moving on to the next segment, introducing Yango and LCOY, and just really giving an overview of Yango and all LCOY and why we're really doing this at the end of the day. I think in Botswana, as in many parts of the world, we've felt the impact of climate change and they're becoming more apparent, from water scarcity to degradation of our landscapes. But there's one undeniable fact that young people and children need to be at the heart of the solutions that we create at a national level. And so our voices, ideas, and actions are key to shaping our future. And a future that is sustainable and a future that is just. And that's why we're here today. We're here to ignite youth and children's participation in climate governance in Botswana. We've seen the power of young people and youth movements across the world, across different development issues. But we think now it's time for us here in Botswana to build our own platform to change. And so to understand how we can be more involved in climate governance, I'll begin by explaining the UNFCCC, right? The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Now, the UNFCCC is a global treaty. It's a global agreement that's designed to tackle climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions and adapting to all the impacts of climate change. And so since its creation in 1992, it has united governments globally. It has united civil society organizations, as well as businesses across the world in climate negotiations. And most notably at the annual Conference of Parties, or the COP meetings. The next COP meeting, which will be the 29th Conference of Parties, will be held in Azerbaijan actually next month. And so through the UNFCCC, countries have made landmark agreements like the Paris Agreement, which aims to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. But for these agreements to be successful, it's important that every segment of society, including young people, including youth and children, are involved. And that is where platforms like Yango come in. So what is Yango? Yango is the official youth constituency of the UNFCCC. As I had mentioned earlier, the UNFCCC is a convening or is an agreement that different countries across the world are party to. Now, as part of the UNFCCC, there's different constituencies that are non-state actors, and some of those are youth. And so Yango is the official youth constituency to this agreement that was formed to ensure that children and young people have a say in climate decision-making. And so Yango is not just a symbolic space for youth participation. It's an influential network of young people from over 200 organizations worldwide, all working to influence global climate policies. What makes Yango unique is that it brings young people directly into the heart of global climate governance. Through Yango, youth representatives participate in climate negotiations, and they contribute to policy discussions and advocate for stronger, more ambitious climate actions. And these are the spaces where our generation can shape decisions that impact our future. Botswana's young people can look to Yango as a model for how youth can effectively drive climate solutions, that we have a voice and we have a right to use it to protect our future. And so I think I'd want to also take this opportunity to motivate and to really drive Botswana children and youth to join Yango. There's currently a call for membership for individuals, young climate activists, innovators, to be members to Yango. I think we will also share the link to the Yango website for those interested in joining this global movement of young people. We will share that later in the chat box. I think, Tech, if you're able to, please feel free to share. Now, it's not just about youth participation in climate governance is not just about, global conversations. While platforms like Yango do enable youth participation at the international level, it's also important that we focus on local issues. That is why the local conferences of youth are so important, the LCOYs. Now, LCOYs are national gatherings where young people can discuss climate issues specific to their country, specific to their communities. They provide an opportunity for youth to draft climate policies that are directly relevant to our local contexts. For example, here in Botswana, we are hosting our LCOY on the 23rd and 24th of October. And we hope this will address critical issues around issues that are pertinent to Botswana, such as desertification, water scarcity, biodiversity conservation, and others, which are unique challenges to Botswana that we face due to climate change. The Botswana Local Conference of Youth, which we are launching today, is a significant milestone. It is our space to bring our voices together and create climate solutions that work for us. The outcomes of our discussions here can be shared globally, ensuring that Botswana's youth are part of the global climate dialogue. And so LCOYs also build the capacity of young people to advocate for change. They give us the tools, the platform, and the network to push for meaningful climate action at local and national levels. Through LCOYs, we can influence national policies that reflect our needs, ensuring that Botswana's climate strategies are inclusive of youth voices. And so I urge you all who are here and all who will be watching this webinar much, much later, all young people, children, parents, educators, and community leaders, let's seize this moment and let's take full advantage of these platforms that are available to us, platforms like Yango, platforms like the Botswana LCOY, to drive meaningful change. Climate governance isn't just for governments, it's for all of us, especially the youth who will inherit this planet. We have ideas, we have the energy and the will to lead Botswana towards a sustainable future. So we need to step up and create a generation that transforms narratives into action and action into lasting change. I think that's it. So if you do have a question on the UNFCCC, on Yango, or on LCOY, please leave those questions for us in the chat, rather in the Q&A segment, and we will get to those questions during the course of the webinar. And I think with that, I would like to move to the next segment of this webinar that looks at communications and importance to young people, and why we need effective communication strategies for youth in climate advocacy. And leading us in that is Sabine Mateka. Sabine is a multifaceted, experienced strategic communications professional with a demonstrated history of working with development-focused organizations across the world. Sabine is well-versed in the realms of climate diplomacy and digital rights, with strong skills in storytelling, research communications, and event moderation. She previously worked for Global Strategic Communications Council, the GSCC, Action Aid Denmark, and World Wide Web Foundation. Sabine, over to you, and welcome to the Driving Narratives webinar.
Thank you. I just want to confirm that you can see me. Okay.
It's a bit dark, but we can see you.
Dark? Okay, my apologies for that. I will turn over properly as I go. But morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. Okay, let's see what I can. So my name is Sabine, as you mentioned, and I'm really excited to be here this morning. Thank you for the great introduction, and thank you to the fellow panelists who I'm joining today. I'm looking forward to hearing more on, how we can all affect change in the climate space, specifically in Botswana, and how we can, move from our local context to action and impact that, affects global change. Because, we don't do our work in a silo. The goal for all of this is for collective action. So as you introduced, I'm a climate communications specialist. I have been doing communications for 8 years. I eat, breathe, and sleep communications. And I also happen to run a sustainable clothing brand here in Botswana, where a large part of all the work that we're doing is trying to change and educate our citizens on a number of issues around sustainability, and more specifically, why we need to think or worry about things like textile waste and how we consume as, how as consumers we need to be aware of the things that we buy and put on our bodies, wear on our bodies, and how that affects us in the environment that we're around. So my work intersects in different ways, but the professional experience that I have is in the climate space. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about the importance of communication, which is kind of the central kind of notion of today's webinar, which is around driving narratives. So I cannot see my slides. I just want to confirm that Tech is able to put those slides up. Okay, great. Thank you so much. We can move to the next slide, where I'll just introduce what my very short conversation will be about. I have about 5 slides. Part of communicating is knowing that after 10 minutes, you lose your audience. So I don't want to lose you. As the first panelist, I want to make sure that we're energized for the rest of the conversations that we're going to be having today. So I'll start with the challenges. What we're kind of facing, the hurdles that we face in communicating change. And then I will go into observations, regional observations. So my working with young people in Asia, young people in the global north, young people in the global south, and what those differences are. And then I will talk about communications and its importance. And then I'll kind of end with, as kind of call to action or call to a guidance into how and who to target when you're doing your communications work. And then I will conclude. So the premise of this all is to unpack the power of narrative building for systems change. We can move to the next slide. Thank you. So first is the challenges in communicating climate change. So I have this quote there that says, well, we have bigger problems than climate change. In the work that I've been doing, one of the challenges that we face is that there is a misperception that climate change does not intersect, or it's a standalone. It comes secondary, or perhaps sometimes last, to some of the issues that we face, especially on the continent. We are facing a myriad of conflicting crises, from poverty to youth unemployment to a number of issues. And this concept of climate change can sometimes seem as an arbitrary, or something that doesn't affect us, or something that is not as of importance of some of the real kind of issues that we seem to be facing. But the reality is that all of these intersect. Poverty and climate change intersect. The way that we think of the economy is affected by climate change, and vice versa. So I just kind of put that as a point of reference of this is the real challenge, one of the kind of challenges that we face in communicating the urgency of the climate emergency. So the first is kind of a mismatch of values. And there's a mismatch between the climate message and the history of the climate message, who has been driving this climate message, what the message says. And I think I can talk openly, about the fact that the narrative building has kind of stemmed from area or part of the world that has been able to shape who gets a voice at the table, what are we talking about? And that has caused a mismatch in values where audiences feel like there's conflicting values, and that they face a kind of social dilemma of, well, this doesn't really affect me. And I think young people are also, an audience that has and will face this kind of conflicting values of whether it's generational or regional. There is this mismatch between the global climate message and its audience. So the second is the complexity of the science. So we just find that communicating climate change and all its different topics such as adaptation, mitigation, it's just a whole bunch of big words that a lot of people don't understand. And also climate change is a science. So science is complicated, it's complex, and it's technical. So how we communicate climate change is something that we have affected every single day of our lives, and something that no one on this earth has not experienced. However, there is that mismatch in terms of people understanding how it affects you and what you can do to change. So the complexity of the science. Then we go to the lack of goal specification. So a lot of people feel like, okay, we have this problem, so how do we deal with this big problem? And there's sometimes a feeling of lack of, okay, so what do we need to affect change? How do we reduce emissions? How do we protect ourselves from different weather patterns? And in doing so, when there's a lack of goal specification, then we have a harboring of feelings of fear, and then it shifts to blame. And again, we lose the message, and the whole idea of communicating change becomes lost because, people defer to feelings of, this is too complicated, this is too scary, this is a them problem, and it just makes it very difficult to affect change. So next slide, please. So moving to our observations in these challenges is looking at how we communicate differently as regions, as parts of the world. There are differences on how we communicate within the continent. We talk about having a unified African voice, but what the east of Africa is facing is different to what the south is facing. And how do we, even as a country, come together and say what the north of the country is facing, perhaps with water scarcity, is different to the southern part with desertification. That word always dribbles me. And the difficulties that there are differences in how we communicate. And one of the differences that I also want to speak to, especially as young people in Botswana and Africa, is that the conviction that the understanding and mitigating of climate vulnerability of richer and poorer countries requires taking into account that we live in an interconnected world. So where a threat in one place can easily ripple out across other countries and continents, there is a need to realize that we do have differences, but there is one fundamental thing, that is that, we live in an interconnected world. So this threat affects us all. So second observation is in local nuances and how we communicate. So because of the challenges that we face around climate change where it's stemming from, the word climate change in our local languages, for example, in Setswana, how do we localize climate change as a topic in order to be something that young people, a young person in rural Botswana is able to feel called to, or understand that this is something that they can actually be a part of affecting change for. So there's local nuances in how we communicate that, not even regionally, but now when we're really zoning it into a country specific like Botswana. And then, yeah, the last point is that, you know, effective change comes with a unified voice. So as we go towards COP29 this year in Azerbaijan, as young people, we may have differences in how Botswana youth are looking at climate change within the local space. We may have differences when a youngo is working with other organizations, youth movements on the continent to come up with, you know, what are our similarities, what are our differences, but effectively, there needs to be a unified voice. And we see the challenges where our leaders go to these events, and we seem to lack a unified voice of what is the African voice. And again, there are nuances, there are differences, but essentially the strength in making change cannot be done if we do not have a unified voice as a people. So I will move to the next slide, please. So this is where we can delve in a little bit about how young people can affect change. So first of all, African youth are the face of the climate movement. Young people are the face of the climate movement. That has been something that we know, and the work that some of the organizations that are present here on this call, as well as some of the individuals who are here, we have some, you know, amazing young African youth voices, and from bigger voices like Vanessa Nakate to up and coming voices, the grassroots voices, we are the face of the climate movement. Whether that's a good or bad thing, it is an evident truth that young people are the face of unemployment, but they're also the face of change and real power to affect that change. So, okay, the next point is that climate change as a generational issue. So generations differ in their contribution to climate change and the susceptibility to its effects. I think we all kind of know that, and especially as young people, that's something that a message that is kind of driven really heavily is that, you know, as young people, we were born into the climate change. We don't know a world that's any different to that. I would say born into the climate crisis, rather. And contextualizing climate change as an intergenerational issue, therefore alters public engagement, like how we speak about climate change. So I'm just going to point to a couple of points from the statistics that I've done around communicating and some of the findings that we've found on communicating. And that one of them is that we find communications that highlight generational differences in the causes and effects of climate change have generally been found to be unhelpful. So basically saying or pointing to the differences of we are young people or we are older people, and kind of this is what we're facing, and or blame shifting or whatever it may be, have generally been found to be unhelpful. And actually, we find that they increase worry amongst young people more than any other group. So this kind of difference, highlighting of differences, actually affects us more as young people. And it actually causes us to feel that we don't have any motivation for us to act. So another point is that most young people underestimate how worried older people are about climate change. And this very misperception correlates with belief that people are less likely to work together to mitigate climate change. So African youth are the face of the climate movement. We're also the face of the climate crisis. How do we work, or how do we ensure that the messaging and narratives that we're driving as young people allow us to pull in a unified movement for climate change as Africans, rather as young people or older people of trying to mitigate the issues that we're seeing on climate change? And then lastly is that communications about climate change likely benefit from avoiding highlighting how climate change, communications about climate change likely benefit from highlighting how climate change affects us all. So again, this is something that I keep repeating throughout the presentation because it is really something that sticks. And we find in our communications work that reminding people that what happens in Pakistan doesn't stay in Pakistan. What happens to young people doesn't only affect young people, that this affects us all. And correcting these misperceptions and separations is where this kind of change exists. So, and then moving to the next point is that climate youth movements and the power of campaigning. Again, we can see that this is something that has a real stronghold, whether that's protests, whether that's global campaigning through media, whatever that may look like, there is real power in that. And again, we, as was spoken about in the beginning by Tracy, is that campaigning looks different in different forms. It may be a pulling of people together, whether it's this webinar that sparks something in one of the attendees today, whatever it may be, that it's not just always this big Greta Thunberg-led, campaign. It's also in the small actions that we do and that we take, especially as young people. And that moves to our next one, that Botswana youth need to be at the forefront of this change. And this can really be done through, again, this power of narrative building and working with, whether that's the youth constituencies in your country or with your communities and the community leaders that you work with. A lot of work has been effective through our traditional systems, through the Kutla systems, localizing our local needs to this global problem. Botswana youth need to be at the forefront. I am happy and glad to see that we have young Botswana negotiators who are able to attend COP and to be in the rooms where decisions are being made, and we're able to tech support. We've lost our slides there, but that's okay. Just warning you that your screen is sharing. So just back a slide, please. So making sure that we're able to ensure that Botswana youth are at the forefront. We need more young people as negotiators. That is a form of communication. That's a way of affecting change, where we have young people who are educated on climate change and can really be, just mouthpieces for the issues that we face as Botswana. So lastly is communication and the need for strategic guidance. I think communication is so many things. The criticality here is the strategic guidance around it. So how we think about communication is also changing, especially in the climate space. Strategic communication is a huge element of that, where you have a specific goal. And in this case, when we're talking about narratives is just basically building up a story or a context to support your views. So when we think about Botswana youth and when we think about narrative building and the strategic communication that falls under narrative building that falls under strategic communications, building up a story and sticking to that story, whether it is of water scarcity, whatever it may be, having a strategic point as to where you're referencing and building around that, building moments around that, building a pulse around whatever it is the issue is that you want to focus on. There's some issues that are more sexier than others. Mitigation is something that, we know a number of actors are very interested in that. But there's also lesser known or lesser cared for issues such as adaptation, which can be seen as an African issue or whatever it may be, or a global South issue. So really needing an importance and ensuring that in whatever the work that we do, we're not broad about it, we're strategic about it. Next slide, please. So I will conclude with kind of thinking about our communications. Who do we target and how? So the first thing is that the climate bubble is a very difficult space to kind of break out of. We find repeatedly that the work that we do in communication kind of falls into this bubble of the same people, a small group of experts and policymakers and discussions that seem to stay within the climate bubble. And we're finding that that's not obviously helpful. And again, it becomes with this technicality and the complexities of the science. The articles that we write can be very jargon heavy and can kind of exclude the average person from understanding why these narratives are important. I think as young people, that's something that we are gifted at, being that there can be a real benefit from simplifying. We need this as young people, and this is why we need it. So being able to communicate that clearly, and in order to do so, breaking out of this kind of climate bubble that we find the news circuit and the news around climate change staying in, and doing that through targeting local and global media. Local media is still something that can be further developed in how we as a local media are communicating on climate change. But I'm really glad to see that we have some young journalists who around, whether it's leading up to COP, because, climate change can also be something that's not the news of the day every day. But at least when we do have, I hope we have some journalists today who may be attending, but engaging with the concepts of what the main topics may be around a big summit like COP29. Why should Botswana care? Are we discussing critical minerals? How is that linked to our current conversations in the country? And why is Botswana not on, why are they not in the discussions around such things? So as young people, how we decide to engage with the media is a critical thing. And whether that may be in providing workshops as Yango or other organizations to ensure that media are able to communicate clearly on what Botswana are facing. And then, also then linking that to how we speak to global media about the issues that we're facing as Botswana. We find that Botswana, on a global media sense, in terms of climate change, where we are kind of beyond the conservation talks we're not finding that we're having those conversations on a mainstream basis. So again, beyond the conservation talks and how things like water scarcity in the Delta and others may be facing communities around that, we're not hearing what further issues are facing our communities. So again, looking at how you specify on a topic, and then linking that to global conversations. Again, e.g. critical minerals, that's a huge discussion. How are we bringing that in as Botswana? And then engaging your community leaders. I want to wrap quickly. I'm aware about my time. And ensuring that, as I said, like speaking to whatever localized leaders that may look like, let's not underestimate the power of that. Finding ways to reach those at the top. There are difficulties in that in the context that we function in, but they are ways that we ensure that if there's a call out, parliamentary discussions, I'm forgetting the term, where we're able to comment. That's something that we want to make sure that we're doing as young people and making sure that our voices are heard. And then sustaining change and building connection. There's power in finding out what our colleagues or our fellow Ugandans are doing on climate change, working with South African youth activists on what they're doing, how they're affecting change in their communities. So also the power in understanding and building those connections. So I'm going to leave time for questions. I haven't covered everything that I want to cover. Communications is a broad topic, but I hope that what I've shared today has been helpful in somewhat in framing the importance of narrative building for today and beyond that. And I know and believe in the work that young people are doing in Botswana. And I'm happy that we are having this conversation today and looking forward to the LCOY conference that will be happening later on this month. And these are critical things and a form of communication that is, putting our issues as young people and also making sure that the central focus of this meet is on children and youth. That's, a really important dynamic that will help us in the work that we do as young people. So I thank you for your time, and I hope I was able to reach some people in the work that I presented today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sabine, for that comprehensive presentation, right? Just around what do we have to say about climate change? What are we saying about it? Why do we need to have an opinion about it? And how do we go about strategically talking about it in a way that actually has some sort of impact? Thank you very much, Sabine. I think I would have time for just one quick question. And we'll move on to the next presenter. One quick question for Sabine. If there's no other question, we will move on to the next presenter. Tech Support has shared Sabine's LinkedIn. If you're interested in engaging further with Sabine, please check out her LinkedIn. I'm also noting that we have Botswana joining us from all over the country, from as far off as Maung to Tsabong to Khabani, even young Botswana in the diaspora joining in from Zambia as well. Thank you for joining us in this conversation about driving narratives. I think if there's no other question, I think I'll wait for that question, right? So when driving narratives, we really want you to be part of the discourse, part of the discussion. What do you have to say about climate? What do you have to say about how we're creating youth and children narratives around climate change? Some of you might be young people working around climate. And so what have been your experiences as well, just around effective communications or effectively communicating and bringing out the issues around climate. Please feel free to share.
Was that question to me?
Oh, no, generally, just throwing out that question to the participants on the webinar. If you have any questions for Sabine, we have time for one question. All right, noted the yeah, I'm looking for your comments in the chat. What have been your experiences as someone working on climate change or, in environmental protection, just around how you're communicating climate change?
So maybe I can just briefly make a point. Okay, someone has
Yes, please.
Oh no, I just noted someone has a point, so maybe you wanna go to that.
All right, Tinai Mabara says, good morning. I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to share that in framing narratives around climate change, we need to be very intentional about how we speak on our abilities to solve our problems as Africans. We need to frame Africans positively. The future is here, and Africa has the largest population of youth. They need to believe they are capable.
Absolutely. I think that's a great comment. And I'll just make a point to say that communicators around Africa, we have an important duty to take forward the message of a continent of hope, of promise, and of vast potential. So he or she, they've really put a really critical point is that, and again, in the points I was making is that goal specification, our goal as a continent is to grow, to really tap into our untapped potential. So we have an important duty to take forward that message of positivity. And positivity doesn't mean that we're not pointing to the realities of what we're facing young people. So yeah, I'll just end there.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I think interesting factoid, Tinaya is a digital creator herself, and she's a climate change communicator. And she does this via her social media platforms, creating content that covers the climate reality in Botswana, as well as some solutions. And I think I want to highlight the solutions aspect because in the comment, she speaks about framing Africans positively. And so in her content, she highlights what different young people are doing to address climate change in their own different ways. I think it's a creative way to craft the narrative, right? Just on climate action, and to share with the rest of the world as well. Thanks, Tinaya, for that comment and for your incredible work as a climate advocate in Botswana, youth climate advocate in Botswana. If you can reach to her on Equigirl Africa. We have another comment from Lorato Mudongo, who says, I work with the African Union Center for Girls Education. To answer the question, I had not been directly working on climate change. It, however, emerges as directly influencing the work I do. That is access to education for children in Africa. Many people are internally displaced because of climate change, and it affects children's access to learning, retention, and completion rates. We therefore should intentionally unpack the ways in which climate change seeps into the different disciplines we work with.
Absolutely. And again, to the point that I made is that we find that you may not be directly working on climate change. Your work may not be climate change, but the fact that you work on girls' education is, basically a big center of one of the parts of how climate change is affecting our our livelihoods in different ways. I mean, off the top of my head, girls' education is, you could look at many factors as to why young girls are not being able to access education. And there are a number of issues as to how that intersects with, the way that their community may be affected, whether that's due to natural weather patterns, that may be because women are not able to go to school because they have responsibilities at home that may be affected, like fetching water every day. There's some crazy statistics as to how many hours some girls, women, children face just doing the task of daily water fetching, and that can, exclude a young girl from being able to go and get her education. So these are the things that we may not directly put there as, a climate change effect or issue, but as she's rightly, Lerato has rightly placed and said, is that, we need to be intentional about unpacking the ways that these things seep into the different parts of our livelihoods. So thank you for that comment.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sabine. I think the last comment I'm taking is from Joseph Sahodi. He says, great reflections from Sabine. I like the point on using comms to break down the science. This will be the key leaders. This will be key for leaders who can help with driving climate narrative in contextual manners to their communities. Definitely, Joseph. I think keep the comments going. Let's keep the conversation going in the chat, right? Let's keep the conversation going, and we'll move over some of the questions to the Q&A as well. We'd address them a bit later. Thank you so much, Sabine, for that incredible presentation on building effective communication strategies for narrative building.
Thank you so much, Tepiso, and thank you to our attendees for, engaging with my work, and looking forward to answering some of the questions at the end.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I think with that, we'll be moving on to the next presenter, who will be engaging on the importance of climate and positions or positioning, and the significance of climate positioning for children and youth. Introducing Tasneem Essop, who is the Executive Director of Climate Action Network International, the world's largest environmental network of over 1,800 non-governmental organizations in over 130 countries. Tasneem is an expert on climate, energy, poverty, social justice issues, and is the founding director of the Energy Democracy Initiative in South Africa. South African born and based, Ms. Essop has significant experience in the climate movement. She's held various senior government positions in South Africa. Tasneem, welcome.
Thank you very much, Tepiso, and greetings to everybody.
Greetings, Ms. Essop. So over to you.
Great, thank you very much. So to talk to you about why it is critically important for youth to actually take positions on the issue of climate change, and why especially this will need to come from the youth themselves. And to do this, I'd like to start out by asking all of us a real culprit of the climate crisis. The climate change crisis did not happen out of nowhere. It's been caused, and it of course means if it was caused by human activity, there are culprits who actually caused this crisis. And we need to name this and understand this. So the industrialization by the global north, 1800s, when, of course, as many of us would know, the industrialization came off the back of coal, especially the steam engines, etc., etc. That industrialization was also off the back of colonialism and extractivism in the global south. and especially in Africa, where our resources got taken out of the continent and used to create the wealth that the global north was building up. And that is the fundamental starting point of a climate crisis. The global north clearly responsible for this climate crisis historically. And so we need to talk about, therefore, is the injustice that climate change brings with it, where we have a situation where the global north has historically and currently caused this crisis, but the worst impacts of the crisis is being felt by those who are least responsible for that crisis. And particularly in Africa, where the entire continent, for example, is just about contributes 4% of global emissions. And yet, if we look what's happening on the continent, and I'm sure you've already spoken about this, the impacts have been devastating. Flooding, drought, extreme weather events, causing decimation of lives, livelihoods, and sustained decimation when, droughts, of course, creates sustained hardship. So here we have a situation where the climate crisis, not caused by Africans, yet they suffer the most. Situation. That's the fundamental injustice. Now, when you have a situation like that, and you have a continent who throughout history has actually been the victim of extractivism for the interests and development of others, not for our own development, we continue to experience that extractivism today, even in the way solutions to the climate crisis is being presented, where, global north and other interests extract from our continent. We're seeing what's happening in the Congo. Critical minerals are important for the new so-called green economy. Now, extractivism will continue, and Africa will always be people's agendas. So if we do not set our own agenda as Africans, if we are not doing that strongly in a united voice, we will always be having our futures, our present, determined by others. That's clear. And if we are all watching what's happening in the world today, right now, how powerful Western forces align behind their interests, and they could not care about what that does to the lives of many in areas of conflict, in areas of war and genocide. So we have to be very clear whose agenda is driving the world at the moment and at whose expense that agenda is being driven. And the same goes for climate. How we deal with climate, whose voices are we hearing, how the powerful who have obligations to address and lead on addressing the climate crisis have obligations to the global south to finance our ability to deal with the crisis, whether that is through adaptation, as they call it. In other words, this is a reality. We need to now adapt our lives, our economies, our societies to be resilient to these impacts, and also to be able to finance the kind of losses and damage that we're already experiencing due to these climate impacts. But that's not happening. So the global north is doing two things at the moment. One, they continue to expand their use of fossil fuels, which is the key driver of the climate crisis. They continue to expand, while at the same time they're insisting that global south countries must stop, which is all of us must actually phase out, because the climate crisis is a reality and will get worse. But they should have been leading that. And in turn, they should have been supporting the global south to deal with the climate crisis. And on both fronts, they have been failing. Now, if Africans, firstly, are not going to first understand what their needs are in such a crisis and other multiple crises, because they're all connected. And if Africans are not going to stand united in that position, then Africa is actually not even going to have a foot in the door of influencing those very powerful countries that dominate how we need to address this climate crisis. And we see that in the negotiations themselves, where big countries, the big wealthy countries, just dictate the terms of how we need to address this climate crisis, pushing the responsibilities of those who didn't cause it really, and then doing nothing in terms of their own obligation. So for me, things that we need to do. One, our young people on the continent really need to get actively involved in understanding crisis in its political sense, not science, not about technologies, not about the technical work, and you think it's all complicated, because it's not complicated. It is fundamentally about justice. And if you're not going to lead in the battle to ensure justice for all of us on the continent, and then in turn, justice for all in the global south, then, as I said, we will not achieve our own objectives on this continent. Others will dictate how we develop, if we develop, when we develop, who decides on what we develop about. Others will decide when we are supported, when we're not supported, when your life doesn't matter. So we've had experiences of how it has become clear that the global north are absolutely willing to consider our lives in the global south, and in Africa particularly, completely dispensable. We knew this when we recently experienced the COVID crisis, when Western countries were absolutely happy to not support us with vaccines when we needed to save lives. They instead decided not to and just kept it, and also for pharmaceutical profit making. So our lives did not matter in that crisis. Our lives do not matter in the climate crisis. Our lives do not matter. Now, who's going to take up that fight? Who's going to make sure that our lives matter? It's not going to come from the global north. We will need to ensure that our lives matter. And the way we do that is to get organized, to understand the deep root systemic causes of these crises and the power behind it, and then unity and have voice. We must ensure, young people must ensure, that our governments in Africa also stand in the interests of Africa, because often that our African governments, when there's negotiations, give up. They give up to take a strong, courageous stand against the powerful. Very few government heads of state would do that. So certainly we need to be organized as young people. You need to have voice. You need to pressure your governments to represent your real interests. And your interest is about your development, our development on the continent, on our terms, what is best for us. But of course, understanding that we are obviously part of a global commons, and we need to take responsibility collectively for the crisis that is now impacting all lives in the global south. So standing in Africa means standing for the global south. But we need you to put pressure on governments to take a strong and bold stand in the interest of Africa, not sell off our resources to go and make others wealthy, not going off to other governments and not taking a position or abstaining from positions. Africa needs voice, and the only way Africa will assert its voice is if you assert your voice as African youth, you assert your voice with your governments and make sure the governments who represent you in these big, powerful negotiations remain strong. And imagine if Africa was strong, Asia was strong, Latin America was strong. Strength. We are the global majority. We are. How is it possible that still, after centuries, we are not the ones setting the agenda? We are not deciding what the new development path should be for all of us. We are not deciding what our future looks like. We are not making those decisions. And so when I thought about coming to you with a message, my message is exactly that. Don't get into little rabbit holes of trying to think, oh, the climate crisis is a scientific thing. It's complicated. This is fundamentally about your life, justice in your life, your future, the development pathways that we decide on collectively that will ensure that we all have a better life for all. The current economic models that has been imposed on by the world, that even our governments love, has resulted in these crises, has resulted in inequality, has resulted in exacerbated poverty, has resulted in a climate crisis. And it is going to be up to us to find the new vision for the future. How do we develop in a way that ensures we address all of these multiple crises? And we can do that because on this continent, like I heard the previous speaker speak about, we have our solutions. We have such long histories of leadership in solution making and innovation. And we need to be proud of that, not embarrassed by that. We should be proud about that and let that be heard in a way that the entire world sits up and recognizes Africa can lead, and it will come through the voices and the abilities and the skills and the power of young people. I will leave it there. I'm sure there'll be many questions maybe, and happy to take them. Thank you for inviting me to come and share a message with you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Assop, for that incredible message. There is an agenda, and agendas also exist within, the climate governance discourse. And I think what you're really trying to drive there is we must be aware of those agendas, one, and we must be aware of what our agenda is ourselves and drive that agenda forward as Africans, as African youth, as African children, and be unrelenting as well about it. The science might be complex, the governance issues might be complex, but at the very rudimentary level of it's about human livelihoods, and that is our agenda. Thank you so much for that powerful message. I think I'll be taking questions for Tasneem. And so if you have any questions, please engage and join in the conversation. This is a discursive session. It is about your opinions, what you have to say, and you engaging in the conversation as well. And so we have a comment from Neo Michael Musima, who says, you are right. Indeed, we need to advocate as a single voice. We need to come together as one. Definitely true. That makes the youth statement, the children and youth statement on climate change that we are developing throughout this process, through this these webinars and the conference in a couple of weeks, very important at synthesizing, that position. Thank you for that comment, Nell. Thank you for that comment. Now, if you have a comment, please, or a question, shoot, and let's engage in the discourse.
So, Peter, while people are thinking about a question, can I make I've spoken about the kind of, if I can call it that, the wider political and systemic issues around climate change and why we need one voice. I do also want to maybe talk about the COP, the climate COP that's happening at the end of the year. I'm assuming that you are preparing a statement for that COP as well. And so one of the things that is going to be super important on the agenda of that COP, of course, is the issue of climate finance. So this COP needs to make a decision about what the new finance goal will be. COP where that decision is being made. And so you might know in the past, the rich nations committed to delivering 100 billion per year, which did not deliver fully, firstly, and of course it was too little to address such a massive crisis. Now, they are absolutely reluctant to put on the table, and they haven't yet put on the table what they are going to commit to in terms of climate finance. We in the climate movement and in developing countries, we have been saying very clearly, we can't accept billions anymore. We are literally talking about trillions. Especially if we've done we've seen the studies around this, there's something that we call the climate debt, a debt owed by the North to the global South because they've used up carbon space development, as I spoke about. That debt is between 2.5 trillion to 10 trillion. Conservative. And so what we've been saying is any discussion of finance must be looked at in that context of the debt you already owe us. It's not charity. You owe us so much money already. And so you need to put on the table 5 trillion as a most conservative and also as a down payment to the bigger debt. We know we're not going to get 5 trillion, but we're trying to force our own governments to understand you can't go into the negotiations accepting billions when you literally know that we need trillions. And secondly, it is to force rich nations to also come to the table with finance at the levels and scales that we need in the global South and in Africa. So climate finance this year, if you are going to put forward a statement for your governments, for the COP, climate finance is the key issue that needs to be resolved. And it has to ensure that it's just. It's just.
Definitely. That's the new quantified goal on climate finance. Definitely a critical issue for COP29. And the youth position on it is also very important because when talking climate debt, this is debt that, children and youth of the developing world
Looks like we may have lost a moderator. So in trying to keep the conversation going, Tiffany, please just confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Great. So in continuing with the conversation while he joins us, one of the main issues that we face when we talk about climate change, especially in the context of Botswana, is that we have seen this much development because of extractives. Even now, when we talk about, but we need climate action, there is the conversation of we've got these God-given gifts under our ground, like coal, which can bring in development for us. That's the first question. how do we then balance that conversation of, do we just leave money underground to say the climate crisis? And then the second one, Nicole as well shared it here, of yes, there's the climate crisis, but then we've got more urgent problems as youth. We've got unemployment. We've got food insecurity. Inflation right now is really, really high. So, in the conversation of that, how do we connect that with climate? And then how do we even put that into a position statement? Are we not advocating against our own futures? And now I'm handing back over to Tippy. So, it looks like he's.
Thank you for that, Pato. Tasneem, if you have a response for that, yeah.
Yep. This is probably one of the most challenging contradictions, right? In the global south, pretty much development is perceived to be coming through our resources that we extract, and especially our fossil fuel resources. There are two issues that we need to talk about that. If we really believed that it was through the extraction of fossil fuels that we were developing in Africa, that has caused massive development and growth, that it has benefited people, that we have addressed all the issues of poverty, employment, unemployment, etc., then we would have been the wealthiest continent in the world, right? So there's a contradiction. We assume our development only going to come through our ability to extract. But on the other hand, we've not seen the benefits. Again, it's the wealthy elites will benefit from this, and the extraction to the global north where the benefits go to. So we need to be clear about that. However, if we did this properly, and we collectively, at our independent levels in a country, in an inclusive way, planned for a just transition, because we will need to transition away from fossil fuels. The continuing on the path of fossil fuel developments into the future is not going to be beneficial to us in the end, as you have seen. The more we have, the more we emit, the bigger the climate crisis, and we're feeling those impacts. So our future isn't tied to ever increasing emissions in the atmosphere, because we suffer the most. Everything. We've spoken about this. So we're not saying you cannot use your resources at all, stop tomorrow. What we need to do at country level is to have plans for a just transition, where we want to be by 2050. What would we need to do now to be able to achieve those objectives by 2050? If we're going to phase out fossil fuels by 2050, what do we need to build up in terms of our reskilling, our education systems, the economics, the way we would move from fossil fuels to new energy, clean energy, like renewables. But you can't just close something and then suddenly you have nothing, but we want to move to the... So it's a planned process. It's a process of planning. And you have to do that in an inclusive way, because just transition planning is all about procedural justice, the inclusion of all, and especially the youth. So yeah, we firstly should understand when we say, but we need this, and especially our governments, they love to say this, we need to use our fossil fuel resources for our own development. Then you need to ask your government, so if that was the case, why are we not developed? Why do we still not have jobs? Where is the growth that you said was going to come from all these resources? So challenge that thinking. And then secondly, sure, governments, all of the partners in a country, start doing the hard work of just transition planning, because that's when you set agendas. You decide on your development pathway. You decide how you will use your resources in that transition. You decide the terms of which if other countries need your resources, you decide how that will happen. So just transition is the critical, I suppose, needed to have robust planning from how we move away from fossil fuels and other harmful economic activities towards much better, equitable development. Development that will benefit all, not just the few. So that's the one response I'd like to make there. Do not be fooled by this notion that we need we need fossil fuels to develop, because we would have been the wealthiest economies in Africa, and we wouldn't have the problems that we're dealing with, especially unemployment. And so on the issue of unemployment, about the basics, etc., again, our governments have not put in policies and measures that have actually forefronted the needs of its own people. They haven't done that. It's constantly, and they try to confuse us with all this economics. Yeah, we have a balance of, we need dollars, we need to trade, etc. We have a trade imbalance, etc., etc. But we need to make sure that we don't put our countries into debt. Who makes those decisions? Why have we decided to allow our country to be in debt as well? And so sovereignty becomes critical. How do we ensure sovereignty? Who makes decisions about, for example, the history of Africa? Food. We supposedly the food basket, or we were the food basket. Someone else decided what you need to grow on the continent. Cash crops for others' needs, not our own needs. All these things are systemic. They are root causes for why we are in this dilemma. We need to take back control. And when we decide what's good for our country, what kind of economy we want, our sovereignty, of course, addressing unemployment would be the key to that. So you would have to look at the kinds of sectors that would be clean, but also employment generating. It's in your hands. Yeah. You have to pressure the government.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Tasmin, for that strong messaging. We need to take back control, because these other developmental issues are systemic issues. And so, yeah, we need to own the agenda as well. Thank you for those contributions, Tanzine. We do have more questions in the chat, but we are running out of time. I think Joseph Sahudi in the comments was asking on reflections on climate finance going to reducing emissions versus largely investing in resilience building, given that Africa contributes 4% of emissions but experiences devastating and costly effects. While we might not be able to get into a response to that question, maybe we can continue that conversation in the chat room. I think maybe with that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Elizabeth Gulugulu, who'll speak on strengthening the African youth voice in climate discourse, youth and youth position. And in youth positioning. Elizabeth Gulugulu is a former focal point, Yango focal point, Global South focal point. Elizabeth, welcome to the Driving Narratives webinar.
Hi, everyone. We apologize we've got a bit of a tech issue, but there we go.
All right, thank you for that, Pato. Our speaker is experiencing some technical difficulties, but I think with that, maybe I would like to bring you over, Pato, to maybe speak a little on this, Pato, on our call to action for the webinar, from the webinar.
Awesome. Please just confirm that you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Great. Hi, everyone. Firstly, thank you so much for joining us today. Okay. Oh, Now you're seeing my business in the background. Thank you so much for joining us today and showing up in your numbers. And my responsibility today, Tasneem just now was talking about the importance of organizing, of showing up together. And as young people of Botswana, as we are here today, the importance of putting pressure, but not just putting pressure, but ensuring that when our governments go to spaces like COP29, where they're negotiating with other governments, our voice is heard. Not only is our voice heard, but our perspectives are present. And that is why we are putting together the position paper. Firstly, it's why we've put together LCOY. And the outcome of LCOY, we're hoping to have a position paper that speaks to our experiences and what we wish to see. What are the most pressing issues for us as young people, as children, as youth in Botswana, and making sure that with this document, when someone opens it and wants to know what is bothering young people, they open it, they know what is bothering us. And if a development partner comes and they say, how can I help young people? What do young people in Botswana want, considering that we're facing the climate crisis? When they open it, they find solutions of this is what young people want to do, and this is how I can support them. So my part is to call to action. We were supposed to have two other speakers. Unfortunately, they haven't joined us yet, but I think this is a great place to come in after Tasneem's words on that we need to be part of the politics. We need to be part of the justice, because it's our justice that we're fighting for, really. And our call to action today is we're putting together a position paper. This position paper is going to be presented to the Ministry of Environment, who are the ones who lead when it comes to the UNFCCC process, and the COPs and those who represent us when it comes to the negotiations for the negotiations within that platform. And we have okay, I'm going to share a link in the Zoom chat. All right, so we have a link to register to take part in LCOY, and whether you will be taking part or not, you can say that you're only responding. You're responding so that we have your voice in the. Let me do this. Well, you're responding so that we have your voice as part of that statement, because we're trying to be as representative as possible when it comes to what we put in that document. And even with having this webinar as virtual, we're looking at virtual is not perfect for getting all the young people together, but we can get way more than if it was physical. So we've got people like Botle Mahami, who's joining us from Sebele Kobuan. We've got people who are joining us from Tsabong. We've got people who are joining us from Palape. We've also got people who are joining us from Maung and Lekokopong. So responding to this to make sure that your voice is part of this position that we are taking collectively as children and youth to inform government strategy. So when you look at the phone, I hope all of you can see my screen. I'm just going to take you through it quickly. So you do put your name and last name in there, because there will be a page where we acknowledge who was part of this, and then age group as well, because we want to know how many. When we say youth, is it really youth or youthful, non-youth? Gender, you don't have to put in your phone number. And then the stuff that's really, really important to us are these questions at the bottom. Are you currently leading action in your district to combat climate action? And this comes from, yes, we're facing the climate crisis, but there's so much erasure of the actions that we're taking. Someone earlier talked about Tinaya's platform. We've got podcasts, we've got people who are organizing, we've got people who are doing cleanups, we've got people who are doing sustainable fashion. So are you currently
taking any action that addresses climate change and the climate crisis, so that we can also include it in that report to say this is what we're already doing as young people. We're not just waiting for handouts. And then what do you think is the biggest challenge in dealing with the current climate crisis, mo Botswana? What's important to you? Because what's going to be the biggest thing for me in Gaborone is not the same thing for you, Komaung is not the same for you, Kosibili, which is why I would like you to respond to that as well. How do you think youth can contribute towards it? This question also helps us resource for these it helps us resource for these solutions. So if your solution is that young people should meet quarterly to build relationships, when we try to meet next time, we say, this is what young people want, and then we can get the resources behind it. And what are your expectations of LCOY Botswana? We want to put out this document, this position paper, but it's not just about what as the organizers we want. We also want to make sure that we put together a space that is valuable to people who are attending the conference as well, who can also say, yes, I went, they contributed to the position paper, but these are my expectations and they were met. And if you respond to that one, we can make sure that on the 23rd and 24th, when we host the physical LCOY after the pre-LCOY events, we meet your expectations. And then what demands do you have for the government on climate change? When we present this paper and the minister opens it, or the VP or the president opens it and says, there's going to be a section in there that says, we want government to do 1, 2, 3. Again, it's important for your voice to be in there. It's important for what you want as Monana Goling thing with the life experiences you've had with the different aspects of your life to respond to that. And then what demands do you have for private businesses as people who are, some of us are entrepreneurs, some of us want to go into entrepreneurship, some of us are going to work in private businesses. And we know that private businesses are some of the industries that are leading when it comes to causing climate change. What do we want from them? Whether it's CSR, whether it's different practices of business, what do you want from them? What do they find in there? What does your voice say? And then from civil society organizations, when Bukongo or any other larger civil society, international civil society, national civil society, when they open that, what do we want? Do we want to organize better? Do we want to connect? Do you want to stay separated? Because then we can address different issues at the same time. Do you want better representation? What do we want from civil society if they're looking at this and looking to get involved? So, and then anything else that we may have not put in this form that is a burning, important issue for you, knowing that the organizing team is quite small and we're not representative of every single person or every single young person in Botswana. What else do you want to be in that position paper? And as we're launching it, what I want to remind you again is that we need a paper that when we present, you can say, this is definitely what I said. This is definitely what's important to me. And if they can solve this, they are solving my problem. Make sure that your voice is in there. It is important for your voice to be in there. It is important for us to have that kind of representation. Earlier, someone talked about going to COP. Do you even know how to get to COP? If you know how to get to COP, do you know how to put together the resources? If not, is that an important enough issue for you for us to put in the position paper? When you talk about unemployment, how does that feature? How would you like it to feature within climate change? So my part was mostly to launch this paper and tell you why it's important to not just you, why it's important to us as citizens, to us as patriotic citizens who will be going to the polls to vote on the 30th of October, because we're responsible young people who are engaged. And let's engage further. Let's engage beyond let's engage beyond just voting. Let's engage also in the developmental pathways of our country. And I've said quite a bit. And do we have any questions or comments? Or I can say, Awesome. I'm going to look for your name, Oakanza Romeo, on the registration to make sure that you're saying it's important and you're looking forward to it. Please be a part of it. Back to you, Tsipsa.
Thank you so much, Pato. And everyone, don't forget to copy and paste that link. We will also share the link with all the participants from this webinar as well. Be part of the process, be part of the movement, and please do share with all the other young people in your networks. Share with children. This will be the Botswana youth and children's statement on climate change. And so let's make sure we get them to contribute as well. Their names need to also appear. Their opinions also need to be represented in this position paper. Thank you so much for that, Pato. I think with that, I will welcome Elizabeth Gulu, who will speak on the youth position paper on strengthening the African youth voice in climate discourse. Elizabeth is an environmental scientist. She's a climate activist from Zimbabwe, nominated as top 100 youth in conservation by Africa Wildlife Foundation in 2020, and nominated as top 20 women in sustainability. Elizabeth, please, over to you.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Great. Thank you so much for the invitation. I will just be turning on my camera just now. Yeah, I think I have questions before I start my presentation. Just help me understand here. Someone sent the invitation to me, and in the invitation, it stated that you already had a local conference of youth. Is that right? Okay, so
100%.
Yes.
It's coming up on the 23rd and 24th of October.
You will be having, or you already had one?
Oh, no, we will be having in a couple of weeks.
Okay, so this event is to engage young people in the development of the position paper.
Yes.
Great. It's good to have that information clarified. Thank you so much. I just want to say congratulations to you all for organizing such a beautiful event. People might say Zoom meetings are not inclusive, but it's better to do something than not to do anything at all. So you can start with a Zoom meeting, and those that are part of the Zoom meeting, you all have a responsibility to share what you have had in this meeting, and to ensure that other young people, they also get the opportunity to contribute into the position paper as well. I believe you all represent different constituencies, different organizations, and you're from different provinces or districts. So this is actually an opportunity for you to spread the information that has been shared here. I will not introduce myself. That has already been done. I'm from Zimbabwe, yes. And also I once served as the global focal point for the official children and youth constituency to the UNFCCC, which is UNGO, in 2022. And I think in 2022, the momentum for LCOYs was already, was already on the peak, moving from 5 local conferences a year to 74 local conferences of youth in that particular year. I think it was quite impressive. And the kind of partners that got on board to help us so that we could have an LCOY in different countries. And it's good to be speaking with you all today. It's my second time speaking on a platform in Botswana, and I just want to say thank you. So I'm going to share my presentation. If you know me, my presentations, I do not like them to be so boring, but I love being realistic and straight to the point. If you want generic information, you can go on ChatGPT to get generic information, but I normally love speaking from experience and the reality that is on the ground. What does a position paper mean to you and to me? Why are you here in this meeting? How do we get to develop a position paper, and how can we be strategic as young people within the space? I'll be giving you examples on, different activities and initiatives that I think young people were not strategic or might not have used their platforms well for learning purposes. And I hope it will be beneficial to you all. So just a minute as I try to. Okay, here we are. I've been tasked to discuss or to engage with you on the topic African youth voices in the climate change discourse and the position paper, how it can be strategic. I'm sure you are seeing familiar faces on this picture, quite active, energetic young people in Africa that are championing climate change, not only at a regional level, but also at a global level. Shout out to them. So first and foremost, I think we need to understand why our voices matter. Why should we be concerned as citizens of Botswana? Why should we be concerned as African citizens? Number one, Africa has the largest population of young people globally. This is why we should be concerned, because we are quite a lot. And usually when we are quite a lot with few resources, then there is a scramble. So this is why we should be concerned. Number two, we should be concerned because we are on the front lines of climate impacts, and this makes our voices so critical. Raise your hand if you have not had water challenges. Just raise your hand if you think you have not been affected by water challenges. Just raise your hand. Okay, raise your hand if you have not been affected by power cuts. Raise your hand if you have not been affected by droughts. Okay, the fact that I'm not seeing any hands coming up, it simply means that we are on the front lines of climate impacts. It might not be you, but it could be your friend, it could be your families that are on the front lines, and it also makes you vulnerable, because if your family is in danger, then you also are expected to act so that you can get to save them. It once happened. I do not want to get into that story now. Maybe later when we meet, I will share that story with you, when my sister got trapped in a flood and I was 400 kilometers away from her. The only person she could contact was me, and the only message I got was help, and that was it. I couldn't get hold of her for 3 good days. So these things are real. These things are happening to us. We don't get to listen on radio or to see on TV. Is the reality that we are quite experiencing. Then the reason why our voices matter is whenever there are problems, there are always opportunities. And I do believe that Africa has so much potentials, and our voices do matter, and our voices should be heard. So this is why I think our voices are important in this conversation. Now we need to understand, as African young people, what have we done? What is our milestone? Where are we now? Of course, there's been a huge momentum. Last week, Zimbabwe was just having its local conference of youth. Then 2 weeks back, Zambia was having the regional conference of youth. Then 2 months back, Morocco was also having the regional conference of youth. And what is happening? We talk about the Africa Climate Summit last year, which took place in Kenya, the Africa Climate Week in Kenya, where young people traveled all the way to engage with policymakers, decision makers, and like-minded people. So African young people are quite engaged, especially at a regional level. They are quite engaged. Of course, there could be issues on how resources are being distributed. You get to find out that other countries have resources for young people, yet other countries do not have resources for young people. Therefore, when we meet at regional platforms, there is lack of representation, especially from other countries with who are struggling a bit with supporting young people's initiatives. So just to give you a context, then there is youth-driven advocacy everywhere. You see Greta started a good campaign, striking for the climate, and we have seen people like Vanessa Nakate from Uganda. We have seen people like Elizabeth Watuti. We have seen people like Nasreen. I do not want to mention most names because I believe we have so many climate activists doing what they can with the resources that they have. And also, young people have contributed into national documents and policies. We're talking about the national adaptation plans. Different climate policies in Zimbabwe is actually consulting on their climate change bill. I believe South Africa already adopted its climate change, already now has a climate change act, but please correct me if I'm wrong. I know Kenya already has a climate change act. Then the NDCs, which should be renewed after each and every 5 years, starting from 2015, when we had the intended nationally determined contributions. In 2020 and 2021, the second cycle of the NDCs was submitted. And now next year, the third cycle of the NDCs will be submitted. And this is when we have the big COP in Brazil. Young people have been part and parcel of this. Young people have been participating at COPs. I've seen various pavilions. I've seen the Zambian pavilion. I've seen the South African pavilion, the Zimbabwean pavilion, the Namibian pavilion, and young people that are taking action and doing events, engaging their governments, other stakeholders. And also, I do not want to talk about challenges because that will be on my next slide. This is how young people have managed to engage. So young people are doing a lot, in as much as it might not be documented, in as much as it might not be known or seen, but I believe young people are doing a lot with limited resources. Now, what are the challenges that young people from Africa are facing? I was not even supposed to put all this information because I would love to believe that this information is obvious. So long you're in Africa, you're experiencing the challenges of being a young person who is in the climate change space. Number one, I briefly touched on this lack of resources. So if I'm looking at resources, I'm not looking at traveling resources to conferences, etc. But how can young people from Botswana access resources that can help them to implement different climate change initiatives? It could be climate change campaigns like tree planting campaigns, installation of solar panels, waste management practices. How can you get access to those funds as young people who are trying to also support the government in implementing such? So that is also where finance comes in. Then we look at how are young people from Botswana capacitated? Are they knowledgeable enough? Are they educated enough? Do they know what climate change is beyond activism? Can they articulate issues to do with climate change with policy makers and still get their voices heard, speaking their language? So we are not only talking about climate injustices now, we want climate finance. We're talking about the language that is being spoken within the negotiation rooms when people are negotiating on just transition. For example, just transition will be a topic of interest, especially in Botswana, because we're looking at how best we can compensate people who have been working in the mining industry. how best can we stop, mining coal and try to transition to renewable energies. What is going to happen to these communities? So many jobs are going to be lost. Do we have a plan? How are we going to compensate them? How are we going to make sure that young people, women are not affected in the long run, since the men are believed to be the breadwinners in our African context, the ones that are going underground, mining these precious minerals. If we opt for a just transition, if the men do not have work anymore because of the just transition, because of the transition that should happen, it means several livelihoods will be affected. And how do we get to engage? How do we make sure that it's just not leaving anyone behind? So such conversations, when we engage with policymakers, how can we put our points across? How can they hear us? How can they say, oh, these are just activists? When we talk about loss and damage, when we talk about NDCs, it's not a matter of, oh, include young people in their NDCs. We need to be factual. What are we looking at? We're looking at forest. What is the state of forest in Botswana? What kind of hectares do we lose each and every year? What kind of hectares should be rehabilitated each and every year? What kind of opportunities that are there? Are we talking about opportunities when it comes to Article 6, carbon credits through implementation of carbon sinks? That kind of information, how are we going to articulate that information within the existing climate change policies? Number two, the challenges we face. We have lack of representation, which is here. You will see at any conference or any engagements. Oh, okay, let's start from a national level. We have the Ministry of Youth. I don't know how active your Ministry of Youth is, so please forgive me. We have the Ministry of Youth, but we also do have the cabinet. We have ministers. How many ministers do we have under the age of 35? Let's start from there. And if we have ministers, okay, maybe the bar is too high. Let's look at the parliamentarians. In terms of parliament, how many young people in parliament that are below the ages of 35? That is really important, because if we have young people in parliament below the ages of 35, definitely they will always champion for young people's concerns and needs. So that is important. There is lack of representation everywhere, especially in the African context. When we look at the cabinet, when you look at ministerial positions, when you look at parliament positions, even the councils that you see, the boards that are currently available, your Environmental Management Protection Agency, I don't know what you call it in your country, they do have a board. The Forest Commission, it does have a board. I'm not so sure if you do have a Climate Change Commission. These kind of boards, you need to be strategic as young people. Look at these boards. Do we have young people? And it's not a matter of just saying we want young people. We want young people that are experts in that particular field. So when we say we want young people to represent us, you yourselves, you know who is capable of doing that job well. You know who is an expert in that area. Advocate for those people. When you're saying young people should be represented, we are not talking about you as an individual, right? Because the moment you start looking at yourself as an individual, then we might lose focus. We might lose focus. So we are looking at those that are capable to do that particular initiative. If you're capable, then good for you. But sometimes you get to see people that are saying, oh, I could have been part of that board. Okay, let's see your qualifications. What do you have? Did you study environmental science? Did you study forest management? Did you study, and you want to be part of the Forest Commission board, you don't even have the qualifications. Please give us a break. We need to be strategic and make sure we have our young people there. Number three, the challenges we are facing. There is lack of jobs everywhere. Currently, I'm in the UK. There are also lack of jobs in the UK. But the most interesting and fascinating thing about the UK is, yeah, you might not find the job that you went to school for, but there is always a job. There is always a job that you might not have studied for. So you might not find the job in environmental science, but if you decide to go the health way, there are always jobs, there are always vacancies, they are always in need of healthcare workers, they are always in need of nurses, they are always in need of doctors, they are always in need of pathologists, they're always in need, you can name it, right? They're always in need of auditors. What you studied for, you might not get that opportunity to actually work, but also here the economy is quite good. If you cannot get the opportunity, it's easy for you to get a scholarship and continue with your studies and do your masters, your PhDs. It's easy for young folks that grew up in this area. But now going back to the African context, if you do not have a job, you do not have a job. It is what it is. If you don't know anyone in your government, if you don't know anyone who is a policy maker, a decision maker, a politician, I'm sorry, it will be difficult for you. This is the reality on the ground. It's a matter of who do you know. If there is an interview, people will just call people for an interview, but already they have someone they have in mind because they've received a call from upstairs. This is how it is. We cannot change this situation. We can only change it if we advocate for young people to be part of these boards that I talked about. This is the only way we can change the situation. This is the only way we can unlock opportunities for us young people within our sector. This is the only way we can have the Botswana that we want it to be, because we have unlocked opportunities for young people in different sectors. Now, I do not want to be too politic about this, but I heard someone saying voting, it's important that you go and vote. No matter what party you vote, it's up to you, but it's important that your voice is heard. You know what's good for you as an individual, you know what's good for you as a young person. Go and vote and make sure the change that you want, you're taking a role and you're taking part in it. Whatever political party you vote for, that's your business. We don't care, but you need to make sure that your voices are heard. Then when we come here, you'll see that our voices are not being heard. And it all goes back to representation. This is the challenge we are having in most African countries. Young people are not represented anywhere. If young people are not represented anywhere, it means our voices can never and will not be heard. So I believe I'm talking to a mature audience here. The whole purpose of this presentation is for you to know that you have an important role to play within the climate change discourse, and your voice is important. I've already given you ways of making sure your voices should be heard, especially within the political spaces. Be part of strategic movements, be part of councils. When people are calling out for boards, apply. Don't look at, but I'm still young. Apply. If you think you have an opportunity to be a parliamentarian, run. We don't care which political party you represent, run, because we know when you're part of people making decisions, you will champion for young people, no matter which political party they do represent. So please keep that in mind. Now, how do we amplify our impact? We have talked about the challenges. There's so many ways that we can amplify our impact in a more strategic manner as young people. Number one, we look at our relationship with our government. How do we relate with the government? I will be honest with you, it's not easy to create a relationship with the government. It also depends with the country you are from. But our governments are quite political, and it's not easy. They love engaging with people from a certain political party. This is normal, right? But you can be strategic. And what I've seen young people making a mistake is they think they know better than the government. Well, when you're talking about creating relationships, it's a 50-50 thing. You need to benefit, the government need to benefit. Go and strategize as a young people. What are the government's strengths? What are the government weaknesses? What are my strengths as an individual or as our organization? What are our weaknesses? If we are now going to approach the government, what should be our entry point? I will just give you an example of how we did it in Zimbabwe when we started engaging with our government. There were young people that have been in the space, and definitely when the government wanted anything to be done, they would go to those young people. But that group of young people, they what do you call it? They were gatekeeping. They never shared opportunities with any young people. Remember, the climate change issue, it started to be talked about in 2013, 2014. And by that time, it was 2015, and we're fairly new in this space, and these people were gatekeeping. The government, they didn't know me. I went to school, I studied a BSc in environmental science. Then there are young people that I worked with, but the government knew them, though they were not even educated or, yeah, I will not say much, but yeah, they were not educated, but the government loved working with them because they've been in the space for some time. And I would ask myself, I would get frustrated when those young people are nominated to speak somewhere. And I would like, come on, why are you inviting these people? What have they done? What do they know? Because that time I wasn't thinking outside the box. But those young people were strategic because they managed to capture the government's ears in as much as they were not qualified to do so. And yet I was qualified to do so. I could not capture the government's ears. And I would always cry foul. And I'm like, why are they inviting these people? What do they know? So I had to go back to the drawing board. And I was like, okay, I'm going to work with these young people. These young people are going to introduce me to the government. So I started working with these young people. I started, doing the best that I could, supporting them. Before you know it, there was a meeting. These young people, they recommended me to go to that meeting. I went to the meeting, I networked, I shared my contacts, and I told people this is what I do, and I'm working with these young people. Slowly, the government started to recognize my presence. Slowly, the government realized, this person is actually qualified. Slowly, the government invited me to more meetings, more trainings. I got capacitated by the government. I got educated. The government started giving me accreditation to participate at COPs, though I had to look for my own funding, but it meant a lot. So since 2015, we've been engaging with our Zimbabwean government. And as you can see here, this guy used to be our Minister of Environment for Zimbabwe. He's now the Minister of Economic Development, Minister of Industry and Commerce. But this is how it started. You need to create a relationship with the government. You don't know it all. The government doesn't know it all. Your efforts need to complement each other. Sometimes you have to be humble. In as much as you know it all, if the government says, you don't know, say, yes, we don't know. And this is why we are here to learn from you. Give them that respect. They always want that level of respect. By giving them the level of respect, it doesn't mean you're dumb. It doesn't mean you're stupid. But this is a strategy. Your strategy as your organization, a strategy as an individual. You need to be strategic. And one of the mistakes that I have seen young people doing is they love reaching out to UN agencies, UNICEF, UNDP, UNFPA, etc., especially when they want to travel. That is a wrong approach altogether. And please, if you are planning to do that, stop. Stop doing that. Stop reaching out to UN agencies because you want to travel and yet you have not established a relationship with them. This is what clever people will do at the beginning of the year. Come up with your work plan as young people and say, this is what we want to achieve this year. Share your work plan with the government. Share your work plan with UNICEF. Share your work plan with the UNDP. Share your work plan with the NFPA. Your work plan should state who is responsible, who should be responsible for each and every task that you would have listed. If you think UNICEF should be responsible for the LCOY, it should state that way. Request for a meeting as early as February, March. Request for a meeting with these organizations so that you can go through your work plan and you can find synergies. This is what strategic people do. already they now know you, right? And tell them that you're available to support any initiatives that they're doing. And you could, also do the same, invite them to some of the events that you're organizing. This is how you start creating relationships. Honestly, if you're to ask me for $5,000 right now, do you think I'll give you even if I have it? I will not give you because I don't know you. So I just cannot give you. You need to establish a relationship. Relationships are reciprocal. No matter what you tell me, but if you have a friend, there is something that you're benefiting from that friend. And there is something that your friend is benefiting from you. This is how relationships work, right? If you are friends with someone, that someone, you're benefiting something from that someone. You might not be willing to say it, but you are definitely benefiting something. So make sure you establish these important relationship with different stakeholders. They do help you. Whenever you reach out to them, they can be very helpful. And you can amplify your voices through capacity building. Here we're capacitating young people from rural communities. Here we're using art to communicate climate change because we're working with children. And here we were planting trees with young people so that they understand that they need to give back to Mother Nature. Going on my last slide. Now the position paper and call for action. I've already said this. Your strategy. Number one, create relationships. Relationships do work for you. When coming up with a position paper, do not be generic. Look at the gaps. Look at the challenges. What are you currently facing? What kind of change do you want to see? So when crafting a position paper, it's not only about saying the government is not doing this, the government is not doing blah, 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 the government should do this. What are you doing as a young person? Yeah, the government is not doing this, but as a young person, what are you doing? As an organization, what are you doing? Because we have reached to an extent where we need to be accountable of our actions. So it's not a matter of, oh, the NGOs are not doing this. You have to be specific. Your position paper shouldn't be more than 2 pages because no one will read it. If you have plans of submitting it to the government or to higher offices, no one will read it if it's more than 2 pages. Make sure it's short and straight to the point. If you want access to climate finance, what exactly does this climate finance look for? Are you going to ask the government to establish a budget specifically for young people in the climate change? Look at different budgets. There's the environmental budget. From that budget, do you think there could be a portion that could be channeled to young people to implement their initiatives? You need to be strategic. Do not advocate for things that are already being implemented in your particular country. Maybe your country is already implementing climate change education somewhere, right? Get your facts right. Do not say we call for climate education because Zimbabwe is calling for climate education in their position paper. Get your facts right before you put it on the position paper. Like I said, the whole point is to make sure these people get to hear us and they need to know we are speaking from an informed point of view and we're capable to speak their language. Acknowledge where good work has been done. If your government have done something in climate and environment, you start by acknowledging. We acknowledge the government of Botswana for establishing the ... We would like to acknowledge the government of Botswana for supporting young people to participate at COP23, COP24 by offering badges. We would like to acknowledge. This is how you get people listen to what you're saying because you're appreciating the good work that they have done. And then you go on to say, however, we feel like we call upon ... we would like to emphasize on ... We recall on, you reference to other policies that you think there are gaps missing when it comes to youth involvement and youth participation. Now, I will not say much. I have so much to say, but I will not say much. I believe the little that I've shared with you will go a long way. Never take local actions as if they are not important. They are quite critical. I started from a local, I reached to a global level, and this is me with the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, but it's because I started local. So this is just to motivate someone to say your voice is important and it matters. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think that's better. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was amazing. Especially how practical it was. I think just starting in the chat, looking at some of the comments. Waganse says learning a lot. Thanks for sharing the lifelong tips, and then Tipang also interesting presentation. Tanaya agreeing there with appreciating the some of the tips that you shared. And I think my main takeaway from that was the idea of needing to collaborate and have a strategy. I think we all agree that when it comes to the climate crisis, we all need to have a hand on, but also appreciating collaboration. And as young people, yet sometimes we're frustrated. We walk in there and we don't prioritize collaboration so much. And then in going forward, thank you for the practical tips. You talked to gatekeeping as well as the reason for coming in there. And for you, with the journey that you've had, starting from Zimbabwe to the position to being one of the co-coordinators of Yango to now a global platform where you are engaging with the UN. You shared a lot of tips, but what is the one thing that from this, from your presentation, from this call, if someone could only remember one thing and they would take it and keep with them to help facilitate their journey as on taking climate action, but also on engaging different actors and on contributing to the national position paper. I know you've said a lot, but if there was one thing that you'd say, hold this and keep it, what would that be?
I would say be humble. Be humble and show respect where it's due. That's what I would say. It goes a long way. It goes a long way. Yeah.
Be humble and show respect where it's due. Elizabeth, thank you so much. Your journey has been nothing less than inspiring and motivating, especially when we feel our voices sometimes don't count. And thank you for making time to join us all the way from, I think it's the UK. Thank you so much. Please enjoy the rest of your day. We will be in touch. We'll continue to share some of the tips that you shared. And there we go. If anyone would like to stay in touch with Elizabeth, as I'm sure all of you would, she has generously shared her LinkedIn the link to her LinkedIn in the chat. And again, I'm going to share that link to the position paper that we're putting together. She's made it very clear why it's so important to have your voice in there and what you need to put in there. Please feel free to contribute there. And now we are going to go to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Re Keabile Tlalerwa. Re Tlalerwa is a lecturer at the University of Botswana, and he's the patron of the University of Botswana Environmental and Wildlife Club, I think they are called. He does a lot of work with young people, supporting them around engaging with climate action, with environment. And he's a scientist. And when it all comes down to it, a lot of this does have a lot, the foundation of it is the science. That's how we know we're in crisis. That's how we know our futures as young people and children are at risk. And that's how we know we must take action. And today we'll be speaking to Re Tlalerwa will be speaking to us about exploring the science, Botswana's climate reality. We do have all of these different conversations that have been going, but what's the reality for Botswana? What does the science say? What does the science look? What does this, not only what does the science say, but what does that look like for us, Botswana? Re Tlalerwa. Re Tlalerwa?
Okay, thank you so much for your patience as well, for the minor glitch. Like she said, my name is Kiabile Thalero. I'm a climatologist by training. I'm also a lecturer in environmental science, and I'm affiliated to the Global Change Institute, which is a climate modeling center at University of Witwatersrand in South Africa, and that's where I'm also doing my PhD. Okay. So we're going to explore the science and start with the Botswana climate reality. Maybe let me just start by making an introduction, just to mention that Botswana, as you all know, is a semi-arid country, largely because of its geographical location. It has got semi-wet and hot summers and dry, cool winters. And it also got a very high level of rainfall availability, which is modulated by the El Nino Southern Oscillation. And that makes Botswana the warmest, the second driest country in Southern Africa. Obviously, that's after Namibia. But in terms of being warm, I would say that it's the warmest. Okay. And because of this high rainfall availability, it's one of the world's most drought-prone countries. Since 1950, it has been experiencing multiple multi-year droughts which have been recorded. Okay. I'll probably just show a synopsis of the drought incidences that we have in Botswana. And drought, of course, is the most important extreme climate risk, which are associated with climate change, largely because it's a good adverse impacts on agricultural production, in water resources, in both urban and rural landscapes. And it also impairs the rural economy and social-cultural structures. And now, currently, because Botswana had reliable on climate-sensitive livelihoods, which include agriculture and varied product harvesting, and we also got an issue of economic diversification at national levels, and which means that opportunities for adaptation tend to be much lower than you'd expect for any country. Okay, and that will probably touch very briefly on that one. What you see there is an image, of course, also. Those are model outputs from the Global Change Institute. I've got a colleague there, Professor Engelbrecht, who have been working on this together, but it has since been published as well. And it just shows you Botswana there in the middle of the map, and just shows you the temperature extremes. So you can see these are different four models, and you can see that the different scenarios for 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees. I'm not sure how most of you are familiar with the climate modeling scenarios, but this just shows you the model climate. And of interest, of course, is this picture here, the last one on the bottom right, which shows you the entire subcontinent is dark. And you can see that this dark color is centered mostly over Botswana and Namibia. I'm saying that they're the warmest in Southern Africa, and I think they're also probably going to be even warmest. Now, then that raises the question: is Botswana really on the verge of a tipping point, given its tipping elements? When you look at the extreme temperatures and what has been happening to the ecosystems. Now, if we share here, look what is happening. High temperatures above 40 degrees have been experienced in 2016 in particular, and those were the highest since 1944. That should be in 2016. I didn't mention that. We also have had record-breaking flash floods in 2010, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, and 2017. And also, all know, Having Dam dried up in 2017, following severe droughts of 2014, and 2015, and 2015, 2016. This has been, it has dried up for the very first time since its construction. And we also have seen Lake Ngami desiccating or drying up, first in 1982, and then repeatedly in 2015, 2018, 2021. So those are some of the indicators which are really pointing to the possibility of some of our ecosystems actually on the verge of a tipping point. So, and 2018-2019 drought, as you all know, it resulted in the failure of 2/3 of the crops which had been planted in the whole of Botswana. And for the first time in Gamiland, in northwestern Botswana, 4,000 cattle died because of the drought. And then we had flooding in 2020, which destroyed the railway line near Musetse in northeastern Botswana. And 16 wagons of a train carrying over 500 tons of salt derailed. You can see the picture on the left there. And then, of course, in the spring in 2021, we had wildfires which killed 137 goats in the Kara district of southwestern Botswana. So those are some of the losses which were incurred, either because of flooding or because of fires or because of drought. Remember that fires themselves are not caused by climate change, but climate change sets up the conditions which are conducive to the widespread of fires, okay, especially drying up pasture, which easily get burnt, and then of course there's cascading, which affects the whole system. Now, and then somebody may ask you why is Botswana experiencing very high temperatures? What is causing that? And what are the dynamics? Well, we've got two major systems in Botswana which really control some of these extreme weather events. And these are obviously modulated by the El Nino circulation. The first one is what we call the Botswana High. This is simply a weather system. It's a high pressure system which forms mostly in summer. And it is the one which decides how often we receive rainfall, how many days or how many weeks should be there for the next rainfall to occur. So it simply separates the rainy days in a way. And it has becoming more persistent. And in the process, it also been attributed to the heat waves that we've been observing. So if you see the model outputs here, you can see the Botswana High, this red here, and then the Botswana High. You can see that it's mostly centered in the western half of Botswana most of the time, but there are times when it's weak, and there are times when it's tends to be very strong. So its strength, of course, determines how much rainfall we're going to get and how often. And then the other one, of course, is a tropical temperate trough. These are just too technical. I don't think maybe most of you do understand about this unless maybe they've done a course on weather systems. But this triple T is mainly responsible for some of the flooding that does occur in Botswana, especially those cloud bands which you see in this image here. You can see the alignment. They bring a lot of rainfall over this country. You can just see the density of the clouds here. And these are just thunderstorms which can normally spread over the whole of Botswana. They normally move from the west to east. So it's more like a westerly trough, you can say that. So they tend to move to this area and then they cause a lot of flooding, lots of rainfall. And they become stronger when the La Nina is strong. So La Nina is also modulating that. So here you can see the projections, which shows you on this side here, these are basically temperatures, and you can see this shaded red here. You can see that in all cases, Botswana is not spared. So the first one, Botswana is partly covered. The second one, these are just 6 different models which will be projected to show our current climate. And you can see that almost the whole of Botswana is being affected by this kind of climate. So you've got a lot of drought, you've got a lot of heat, you've got fires there occurring. So somebody tried to warm himself during a heat wave. And this side of course, you've got the fire danger index, which is normally being shown even in weather forecast. So you can see that Botswana, especially the extreme western half of the country, is very vulnerable to fires. So fires are now they're becoming a very important player in this whole game of climate change, something that we need to be very careful about. So all of these are 6 because it's using 6 different models, and you can see that the outputs, they do not differ very much. And then rainfall as well, or precipitation from the 6 models still, the global 6 models. So you can see here, places with more than 20 millimeters of rainfall. And you can see that if you look at the key, you find that you've got areas which are greenish, and then those are the areas of high rainfall. Then you've got those which are brownish, brown patches, area of low rainfall. As you can see that here, Botswana is not very obvious, but probably only one model here. It depicts quite well. And then if you look at the left, because these are just number of rain days. So obviously Botswana does not have a lot of rainfall days really. But if you look at this one really shows you how the rainfall is going to fare, has been faring. And you can see here that we do have a lot of brown patches on each of these maps, which really show that those areas are deficient in terms of rainfall. And you can see that Botswana, in all models, is shown to be one of the countries which have got, which are among those which have got the lowest rainfall in Southern Africa. So, and of course, the consequences, when the rainfall is surplus, of course, you get flooding. You can see the Ramotswa graveyard, the Taung graveyard here, which can be covered by rain. So you can see this is a water hole in the Kalahari, which are dried up. And of course, one of the consequences, of course, is human-wildlife conflicts. Which you get elephants here that bring down the fence because they need to go and get water in a private farm. So just jumping from where they were because there's no water. So some of the consequences. So now, in the case of climate change in Botswana, we have just seen the maps. We've seen the projections, and we've seen the underlying causes and the dynamics. So frequency intensity of precipitation is one of the major indicators. This is going to impact heavily on agriculture, livestock production, and water availability. I think those are the two sectors really which are hard hit by climate change. And all government programs to mitigate the impacts, they should target mainly those two sectors most. And then the intense frequency intensity of drought, which also affect the agricultural production, livestock production, and water availability as well. And we are seeing changes in rainfall patterns, the onset and cessation of rainfall, which also affects the length of the growing season in agriculture. And then we see the frequency of extreme weather events. It could either be heat waves, which affect crops, vegetable, livestock. This also affects solar batteries and solar cells. I know Kokalaga, the way they use solar, they be complaining that there are solar batteries that are being affected by heat waves. And you find that sometimes the solar system, they simply do not work because it's just too hot. So that's one of the challenges, of course, of using solar energy in a very hot country. Maybe some of you might want to debate on it. Then we've got flash floods, of course, which have been recorded in the last decade. They destroy infrastructure, rangelands, also the interfere with mobility and ecosystem dynamics. Hailstorms as well, we've been experiencing them. Some crops have been killed by hailstorms, infrastructure, livestock, and human property. That's where loss and damage probably comes in, especially when you look at the flash floods and hailstorms. And the characteristic of drought in Botswana, 2023 has been a drought together with 2002, 2003, and 2006, 2007 droughts. These were the most severe since 1972. And of all this, the 2018, 2019, it was the most severe. And then 1992 was 2000 as the most severe according to the available meteorological data as well. So drought can be severe, it can be very severe, depending on the intensity. And then we had the longest drought period there as well. And over the last 20 years, 10 have been moderate, 7 were severe, and 4 are very severe. And what it means that very severe, those affect the whole country in most cases. Severe ones, they may affect only part of the country. And then, of course, the spatial variability in the intensity of the drought means that farmers who live in areas not severely affected by drought will benefit from government. Obviously, when government introduces drought relief, it's not very specific to any area which is hard hit by drought. If it's affecting in a certain region, they just offer a blanket, a blanket coverage for all the regions, regardless of whether they may experience a drought or not. Remember that drought sometimes does not affect in all places. And then you can see here, we gathered meteorological data here, which shows you, this graph here, you had years of above normal rainfall, 12 years of below normal rainfall. Below normal rainfall, of course, those ones you could call that drought because it's below normal. Above normal, you can see that we've got about 3 peaks, 1974, 2000, in 2020 as well. And then this other one, which was in somewhere around the 2017. That was during the NEL. And on the right here, you just got some projections as well, which will show the drought index over Southern Africa, normally using the 3 degrees scenario of global warming. Okay, so you can see how the drought is affecting Southern Africa. Remember that most of these simulations, they look at the whole Southern Africa as a subcontinent. And that's why I feature in myself. What I'll be doing specifically for Botswana, and probably by next year. We should be showing these figures, but this time around, we'll only be showing only for Botswana, so that we don't include the whole region. So I'm going to do a bit of downscaling. Obviously, there's an urgent need for drought resilience programs, looking at what happened in 2015, 2016, where Havana Dam simply dried up since its construction in 1964. I mentioned that earlier. And we also have got the strongest heat wave in record. In 2016, most of you would remember it. We also got the 2016-2017 floods in the Gqeberha region, and then the losses which were incurred close to $1,270 worth of cattle. There's those 836 worth of goats and 97 for chicken. And 2017-2018, we also got excessive flooding in the aftermath of tropical cyclone Dineo. And that resulted in a collapse of the highway bridge in Moshopa village, resulting in 2 vehicles falling over the bridge. You can see them here, but there's no fatalities. And like I mentioned earlier, Ngamiland is one district which has been affected most by drought. I think partly because they don't have open water sources. Most of the water sources are in the Delta area. But that area, of course, is closed off by the cordon fence. So cattle normally, when the Tamaka River is dry, Lake Ngami is dry, the pressure now is on groundwater. And then, of course, I think so this is just a repeat of the slide, but this time it has got all the images that you need. So in conclusions, climate is changing, Botswana is becoming warmer and drier. Well, we all know that. You may also maybe realize that currently we're at 1.4 degrees Celsius in terms of temperature rise. Remember that the Paris Agreement, they're supposed to put a ceiling 1.5 and maybe with an allowance of going to 2.0. Now, the main worry currently is that 1.5 will be reached maybe in the next few years. And I'm sure by 2050, we'll have well exceeded the 2 degrees, which have been set by the Paris Agreement. In essence, the global warming is occurring at a much faster rate than anticipated by global climate observers. So, which means now we've got a very serious problem here. And for us, we suffer from continental effects. We also suffer from ancestral connections. The extreme weather events, that's also where we need a bit of resilience there, adaptation to all those, because we can't prevent them, but at least as individuals or collectively, we can do something to make sure that maybe we tend to make ourselves to be in a position that will allow us to be able to adapt to some of these extreme weather events. And of course, there's also need to increase adaptive capacity in order to achieve climate resilience. And we also need to subsist on climate-proof initiatives or livelihoods, which involve investing more on climate-resilient livelihoods and reduce dependence on rain-fed agricultural systems. And then, of course, you also need to have a sustainable development policy shift. We need to mainstream climate change into sustainable development plans. I'm sure for now, the Department of Environmental Protection, I think they've moved a bit into mainstreaming climate change in all environmental impact assessments for any projects that people want to embark on. And the Ministry of Minerals Energy, they've got this ERP program, which involves renewable energy transitions. And lastly, maybe something that you also need to do is to diversify economy so that you really move away from this climate sensitive livelihoods. And let's start to see what we can do. There were some options which can be exploited in time, maybe with guidance from policymakers or maybe from those climate action advocates. Maybe they can probably help in that regard. Having said that, let me say thank you. I hope I have not extended the time. Hello?
Hello,
Thank you
sir.
so much,
Tshepiso, are you there?
Mr. Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much, Mr. Tlalerwa, for that extensive presentation on Botswana's climate realities. You finished right on time. I think it's important for us to understand the science and align our advocacy with the science as well. I think just for the interest of time, I want to call Joseph Sekgodi to do our closing remarks. And please, if you have comments for Mr. Tlalerwa, please share those comments in the chat box. He will appreciate those comments in the chat as well. With that, I would like to welcome Joseph Sekgodi from UNICEF. Just to note that all the work around LCOY, from the webinars to the conference and to the Children and Youth Statement on Climate Change, is being supported by the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF. Joseph, if you're here, please feel free to jump in with closing remarks and maybe some takeaways from the session.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Tshepiso. Let me just check if you can hear me.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for for the opportunity, and probably maybe in starting my closing remarks, just thank Re Tlalerwa here for his, I think, elaborate presentation, which is, I think it's the recent one from the list of presentations that we got this morning. And I'm also picking on him because I think he somehow answered one of the questions that I had earlier on for Tasneem. I hope I said the name right. For Tasneem around climate financing, which, for me, the question was around, as we are advocating for climate financing, should we be more on the, emission reduction side, or investing a lot more on the resilience building side of things? And I think from Re Tlalerwa's presentation, what I'm getting, or my takeaway from it is, there isn't a lot that we can do in terms of how climate change is affecting us. I think at this point, we can do what we can do in reduction of emissions, but, the issue has already been done, and we are facing the repercussions right now. And what we can do is build that resilience. I think prioritizing around that really makes a lot of good sense. So thanks a lot, Re Tlalerwa, for that elaborate presentation. And I think maybe just making a bit of reflection from the previous presentations. I think the webinar itself, I think it was well arranged. I mean, when I look at the list of the speakers that we've had here, we touched on some of the key things when it comes to climate action and sustainability. One of those being communication for climate action, and the Re Tlalerwa's presentation on the science behind climate change, because some of these issues around climate change can be a bit scientific, and when you are able to get somebody who's able to break them down to us and how they affect or change the situation for, in our daily lives, it's really useful, I think, when you combine the science and the communication bit around it. So I think it was a helpful move around there. And, also, I think two presentations that were focusing on the positioning of young people. I think one from Elizabeth, positioning of young people themselves within the climate action and sustainability, it was quite useful. I saw a lot of clapping of hands going off, and even the comments really were attesting to that. And as well as Tasneem's presentation, I think it was a bit on the radical side also side of things. I mean, it was more, it touched on the economics, but also on the political side of the climate change issue, which for me, I think the lesson or what I take away from that presentation is about, one of the key advocacy issues being climate financing. And, I think it's key. Always, whenever, I think one of the key indicators when you are advocating for something is if you see money following through, then you know that you're actually doing something right. And wherever people are talking and there isn't money coming through, there isn't a lot that can move. So I really do agree 100% with Tasneem on the one of the key things being climate financing around there. So, all in all, to say, I think it was really a useful session, quite insightful, and having that richness that can bring someone into the picture of climate action and sustainability in the context of Botswana. And, as UNICEF, for us, because we are a child-focused organization, obviously, our interest in climate change is from a social justice perspective because children and young people are the ones that will largely inherit the future that, we create today. So it's very critical for us to make sure that, we put in the hand and we support where we can be able to support to push the agenda forward. And I mean, one of those things is, I think this was in 2022 or 23, if I'm not sure, on what we call the UN Convention on the Rights of Children. There was a general comment that was adopted, talking about the rights of children to access clean and sustainable environments. It's actually showcasing something that can trickle down from that top level of National Assembly and be able to see how we contextualize those as we come to the country level. So we have a keen interest in that as UNICEF, and this is why you see us partnering with some of the local organizations that are pushing the mandate of climate action, especially for young people. And we will always be there along with some of our other sister agencies like UNDP, whom we normally work with around this. And I think in closing, maybe lastly, Tsepiso and colleagues, I think on the webinar, I would just want to share an insight for you all as young people to say, sometimes we take for granted the power of being a young person. And I mean, talking from experience, and probably Red Halerwa here might also agree with me. When you are a young person, you do have the opportunity to be bold and to be as ambitious as you can, with little repercussions. Because, we have a lot of young people today being affected by a lot of things, and there is attention, there is an ear for young people. And also, it is taken that young people do have the ideas and do have the drive for the other things, and people do listen. And once you transition out of the youth stage, a lot of things you actually lose them when it comes to you being bold and being ambitious, because you become part of, systems, you become part of something. And, when you become bold, there's a lot that you're likely to lose. So as a young person, I think, you do have that advantage, and I would like to urge you to really capitalize on the advantage that you have as you develop in your position paper and even in the general advocacy around climate action, to actually be bold, be ambitious, and demand a seat, in those forums or those platforms where decision making is being done. It's, even if people try to push, they will try to push, not so hard, because simply because you are young people. So, take advantage of that. I think later on in life, you can be able to look back and say, this is how I spent my youth days and I contributed to 1, 2, 3, 4. So don't let this opportunity really surpass you by, and you know, capitalize on it. I think in terms of my closing remarks, Tsepi, so that is it. I'm really happy with the deliberations today, and you know, looking forward to what's coming more. Thanks everyone. Over.
Thank you so much for that, Joseph Sahudi from UNICEF. And I think lastly to thank all our participants for this webinar. I'd like to welcome Louisa April, who is part of the organizing team for LCOY Botswana 2024. Louisa, welcome. The floor is yours. For the thank you remarks, rather, not welcome. Far from welcome. Louisa, over to you.
Good. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Just to be sure, can we all see me? Am I audible, actually?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right, perfect. Nicole Rumbe here. I just wanted to do the closing remarks because I think we're having technical difficulties with Louisa April, which should be fine. But yeah, I'm just here to thank everybody for coming through, taking the time out of your mornings to come through. Thank you to our sponsors, all of our speakers. This was very insightful information. UNICEF, Tsepiso as well, Pato, everybody that came through to collaborate on this and make sure that it was a success. I think it was very important, very informative. We learned a lot. And thank you for making time. We look forward to working with you some more in the future and simply engaging more and engaging the youth in everything that we have coming up. Over to you, Tsepiso.
All right, thank you very much, Nicole. Nicole Rombe is also part of the organizing team, coming in from Sustain 267. And just a final word before we log out, there are opportunities to further engage. One, this is the first webinar in this series of activities around LCOY. The next webinar will be next week, Wednesday, same time. We will be getting into, you know, the thematic discussions now around building up a draft of the position paper. Please make sure that you come back and you're part of this conversation. This will be a more discursive session, getting into building up a draft for the position paper. And also do help us share the link to that webinar with your networks as well. If you have younger colleagues, if you have younger brothers and sisters, please make sure that you help us reach out to them as well. But also register for the delegate registrations for LCOY, which will be held later this month on the 23rd and 24th are out. And so the delegate registration form should be in the chat, but they will also be shared as a follow-up email after this webinar. That delegate. All right, technical difficulties. Yes, so the delegate registration form will also have questions that are very important for the further development of the position paper. So please do, I know it might be a long form to fill, but it's important that you help contribute to that, the other parts of the delegate registration form as well. We are looking out for volunteers as well to put in their hands for the successful, you know, convening of the Conference of Youth. And so we will share the volunteer registration form. It will also be shared in the chat just now. So if you're interested in being part, in supporting the conference as a volunteer, please fill in the volunteer registration form as well. Yeah, I think that's just about it. Thank you so much for joining us today. You know, part of this work means committing time, and we understand that young people are equally busy. Young people are working, young people are schooling, but you took your time today to join us for this conversation. Please also commit to joining us next week and during the full conference in a couple of weeks. More information will be shared as a follow-on email from this webinar. Thank you very much, everyone.
We're good.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone. See you next week.